This podcast is brought to you by Hills Community Aid and has been funded by Castle Hill RSL. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Good Men Don't podcast. Today we'll be talking about building respectful relationships and the issues in family and domestic violence in today's society. Today's topic is focusing on control and the types of abuse and domestic violence in today's society. Now, when I heard about control being our topic, I thought inwards, and I guess what I came to the conclusion was, am I capable of wanting to be in control, needing to be at that forefront and taking over situations? And I think I think I am very well capable. In a sporting aspect, I really like taking that controlling stance and being in charge. Now, that's for sport. However, can it lead into other problems? My name is Levi. I'm one of your hosts here today, and we'll be talking more and more about control. Here with me is my co-host, Warren. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Thank you, Levi. My wife tells me regularly that I'm too much in control. And I've got a corporate background, as I think we've explained once before. And having a corporate background, you tend to step up into a leadership position and take control. So I have to pull back, I know, from time to time, because I do tend to overpower or take control. Right. So it's something for me that I've got to work on pretty hard in lots of ways. And I think it's mainly for men, especially, because this program is designed specifically for men. So if you're watching, that's fantastic, and we hope that you're going to get something out of this as we go through. Levi, I just one other question before we introduce our guests for today. Yeah. We're about halfway through this program now.
We are,
this whole series. What's the one big takeaway you have so far that you didn't know before?
Oh, gosh. One of the big takeaways is, I guess we haven't touched on it, but control. It's a lot of the topics previously were, I guess, in the spur of the moment. People get angry and then they slowly chip away at their loved ones. And then after taking an inch, they go further and further. So it is tackling the issue at the start, I guess, ensuring that you know what the problems are in abuse, like what the definitions are of abuse, so the different types and things like that. So just learning about the types of abuses.
Okay. For me, it's a little bit different, because when I started looking at this topic, I didn't know much about it. And the more we've talked to people, the more I've researched, I find that the breadth of the problem and the depth of the problem is so much deeper than I ever anticipated. Yeah. And Levi, we've got a fantastic guest in the studio today. Looking forward to meeting him shortly. But first of all, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Senior lecturer in Paramedicine. It's in the School of Health Sciences at Western Sydney University. He's Adjunct Professor at the Peninsula University of Technology in South Africa. He's also an Associate Editor of Paramedicine, which is an internationally peer-reviewed journal about paramedicine. So I think from that perspective, you might say, well, what is a man who knows a lot about paramedicine, what does he know about domestic violence?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, he knows a lot. And guys, if you're listening in, you're going to be absolutely stunned by the amount of information and knowledge that this guy's got. So we want you to say hello to our special guest today. His name is Dr Navin Naidoo. And Navin, welcome. Glad you're here today. Thank you for your time. And we're going to learn so much from you today.
Thanks, Warren and Levi. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So thank you for the invitation to be with you, and look forward to having a great conversation about a very difficult topic, for sure.
Great. Now, when we were talking over the phone, one of the things you mentioned to me, that there was some, I guess, lived experience in your family that got you involved in researching domestic violence. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and just give us a sense of how that's shaped you?
Sure. I think it's It's always something that I have no problem doing, although it's with a heavy heart that I say this.
Yeah.
But it's important to claim some level of authenticity in the space. Men are often indicted into the conversation about gender-based violence rather than being invited into the conversation. And so I really appreciate you taking the lead in inviting men into the discussion without fear of reprisals, without fear of blame and shame that's associated with talking about men's violence against women. So my own experience is that I was a paramedic student in my second year of study in South Africa, and I was rescuing other people, playing an active role in the anti-apartheid movement, and had lots of experience with violence from the state, the apartheid police. We had lots of experience with violence in the community from violent crime, but never did we think that that domestic violence could cause femicide and could result in really destabilizing an entire family. So in 1995, 30 years ago this week actually, my 19-year-old sister was murdered at the hands of an ex-boyfriend.
Oh,
Yeah. So and of course we didn't see that coming, and I've spent the last 30 years simply trying to make sense of it all and trying to use research as a mechanism to understand the complexity of the problem. And what I've come to realize is that the more time I spend in this, the sometimes the less we know, because it's that complicated. But the important thing is that we don't stop the conversation, and that we use every case of harm to better understand how we can prevent that from happening to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that's something that sort of it's influenced you in terms of your work, but in terms of what you went through as a family during that time must have been horrendous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 2 years later, my dad passed away. He was age 55. So, the violence ripples, not just with the people who are involved in the violence, but it involves, it has a ripple effect on the rest of the family, and equally so to the rest of the community within which those families reside. So, this is what makes it such a complex problem, is that the effects of it are not just experienced by the person experiencing the abuse, but that it's experienced by children who witness it, by parents who feel powerless to stop it, by friends who are isolated from the person who's experiencing the violence, and so on. So it does disable and disempower many people involved in the domestic relationship where violence exists.
I think I've been saying right from the very outset on this program, Levi, I know I had this conversation with you once before, that I didn't think I had any lived experience with domestic violence. But as I've been researching my family, I've found some interesting stuff. And if we have time, I'd like to ask you about it, because I'm not too sure whether it's domestic violence or not, but I think it is. And it's certainly something I'm trying to find an answer to. But we'll do that later on. Let's sort of get into the conversation, I guess, in terms of the real issues. So now, I think the very first thing we'd like to try and understand and have explained for us is, what is this term domestic violence here? How do you explain that to guys who are watching this in a very simplistic way that they can understand it, and of course the people watching will be a combination of people who are just watching for interest, and there might be some people who are tendencies towards violence. So maybe you can start us off.
Sure. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that domestic violence, whilst it occurs in a domestic context, is not just a domestic problem. It's a far bigger problem than that. It's a societal problem. It's a problem that involves you and I, and that's why we're here today. So in the past, domestic violence was considered to be a closed issue, a private issue, something that's between man and women. Nobody should get involved in that because it's a private matter, and this is what has enabled violence to continue in this form. Monsters, they say, live in the dark, and what it requires is podcasts like this and activities like this that switches the lights on, that sheds light on the topic, and because monsters disappear when you switch on the light. And not to say that people who abuse are monsters, but the analogy is that we have to switch on the light and illuminate the topic. It's no longer a private issue because it affects everybody. So in simple terms, for me, domestic violence is a behavior that manifests in different forms of violence, which can be psychological, physical, emotional. It can be financial in terms of abuse. And the impact of this is negative. There's no good that comes from these forms of violence and control. And the motivation behind it is often and most times driven by the need, an intrinsic need for power and control, which you've been talking about earlier. So I think that's it. It's a behavior manifesting in different forms with very negative health and other outcomes, and is really a violation of rights. It's a violation of individual rights, personal rights, and that for me is a huge problem because nobody gives us these rights. You have human rights because you're born into the human race, and so you have these rights at birth. And nobody there, no other human, should be allowed to take away those rights from you. But in some relationships, men and some women may have the idea that it's their prerogative to control or limit that right. And this is the inherent problem. It's a violation of human rights. And nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to be a human rights abuser or a human rights violator. But the reality is that we often have the predisposition to do that. And it needs a very conscious and deliberate action from us to prevent the violation of rights and to, in fact, protect the rights of others.
So what you're talking there is a very broad perspective. Yeah. One of the things that, Levi, I don't know if you see it the same as I do, but I see a lot of times the press focuses on the physical part and the violence, but we know that domestic violence is far broader than that. And one of the terms that I see a lot more these days is coercive control. And to some degree, I still don't really understand coercive control. Maybe you can explain it to me. I guess that would be really useful.
Well, I think for me the hardest part is spelling it. I know there's an O and an E and an R, but I always get the order of it all mixed up.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. The focus has historically been on physical violence initially, because we would occasionally see horrific violent cases come to the public domain, and that would create a public outroar. How could anybody be so vicious with another human being, especially somebody to whom they may have once professed love and affection? And so what we see is through the research that's been done into gender-based violence and domestic violence is that there are more insidious forms of control, that overt forms of violence may very well control, but that's not necessarily where the violence starts. Very often the violence may start with coercive control and sometimes never result in physical violence, but is protracted. And coercive control is now being deemed a criminal offense because it's a pattern of abusive behavior. It's directed at a current or former intimate partner, and it has the impact of it is really what's at the core of this. The impact of coercion is that it isolates people, it intimidates people, it uses it's very threatening undertone or direct language, and of course the impact of it is that it manipulates the other person's behavior. So if I said to you, so Warren, is that your question? Is that what you want to know from me? Really? Mm-hmm. Really?
So you're putting pressure on me?
Yeah, I mean, that's coercion right there.
Yeah.
So coercion can manifest in silence. It can manifest in direct language. Sometimes it's very indirect. Is that what you're wearing today?
That's what I'm wearing. Do you like it?
No. It doesn't matter what I like. Do you like it? You're going to go out like that? You're going to go out in public like that?
Yeah.
Is that what you want? So just so that kind of
Yeah.
framing, the tone, the
Right.
posture, the language, the undertone, all suggests that your choice of garment is wrong.
Yeah.
And so the suggestive behavior is coercive. It's coercive because I'm getting you to alter your conduct. I'm getting you to think twice
Right.
about your choices.
Right.
And so affects how you think about yourself. So the impact of this is that it undermines your sense of autonomy.
Yeah.
It gets you to rethink, did I make the right decision there? Oh, this is making me unhappy. It's my fault. I must think twice about what I wear. I must think twice about how I speak. I've got to be careful about my choice of makeup. I've got to. The coercion really results, and the intention behind it is change in behavior and
Yeah.
change in control. But the reality is that you can never really satisfy the person who's being coercive, because it will always be inadequate. It'll be insufficient. So there are some rules around what constitutes coercion. One is that it has to be a pattern of behavior. So
Yeah.
whereas with violence it can be a single act or an act that's replicated, but with coercion it would generally need to have a pattern, and it's hard
Yeah.
to see a pattern if it's a singular occurrence. So normally that behavior would have to be linked to some other
Right.
coercive
Yeah.
conduct, and so there's a pattern of coercion, pattern of causing you to second guess yourself, to think twice,
Right.
to gaslight. And of course, there's the intention to control. So when I'm coercive, I'm intending it. It's
Yeah.
not an accident. You see?
Yeah.
So you got me thinking and double guessing.
Yeah.
So I've always thought that coercive control was almost just a word that talked about and took over from things like emotional control or emotional abuse and financial abuse. But it's far wider than that. Does it extend to physical abuse?
So coercion can result in that. So it can involve physical violence. And of course, physical violence then is an extreme form of coercion,
Yeah.
right? It's using force,
Yeah.
not words. So silence can be deafening, isn't it?
Silence.
You heard what I said, Warren.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got you.
And that silence is absolutely threatening.
Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
it's what is not said that is
Yeah.
actually absolutely threatening.
We had, Levi, just last week, we had an interview with a reformed abuser.
Yeah.
And one of his techniques was that when he had a conversation with his wife, and a coercive, he would then withdraw and be silent for days on end.
Yeah.
So that was his exerting his power.
Absolutely, and and of course men who, and again you said abuser, and of course some more less threatening language would be men who use violence
Yep.
in these relationships, and of course that is abusive, and yes they are abusers, but this is not about name calling because again this is why men feel indicted
Yeah.
rather than being invited
Yeah.
to acknowledge their own conduct and their own behavior.
Yeah.
And so men who use violence will often change tactics to assert control. And the intention is to be manipulative and to have the last word.
Yeah.
And if it's not today, then it's tomorrow and the other day or the other day. And they'll, and of course, if the message is not getting across, one would then see an escalation of violence. There'll be other forms of coercion intended to manipulate, distract, confuse, undermine autonomy. And then, of course, if that doesn't work, it may very well escalate to physical coercion, which is violence, physical violence.
Navin, you did mention coercive control. It's not just one isolated incident. However, you also said they need to have intent. Are you sure they need to have intent? Just because someone doesn't know it's coercive control doesn't mean it's not coercive control, right? Or no?
No. The intention is in the design. So what other outcome could there be?
Sure.
So we again, it depends. We're not talking about about legal proceedings. We're talking about an understanding of coercion
Sure.
in terms of what did you intend? What other outcome could there have been if you didn't talk to your spouse for 3 days?
Yeah.
What other impact would that have,
Yeah.
except for her to apologize to you or to change her conduct
Yeah.
or for her to be less autonomous?
Yeah.
So the intention and the outcome are very much linked.
Okay. Sure. So I guess they need to have some understanding, and then they'd also need to have like a negative intent, which would be coercive control, as opposed to, let's say you gave the same example and I say, Navin, did you really choose that outfit here to talk to us?
Well, Levi, the negative intent is not necessarily seen as negative by the person using coercion,
Yeah.
because for them, it's the intention is positive for them,
Right.
because it's about maintaining my control.
Yeah.
So if I'm maintaining my control, that's positive for me.
Yeah.
Your concerns are none of my concerns.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about how you experience the coercion.
Sure.
All I'm interested in is achieving the outcome of my satisfaction, to my satisfaction. Right? So I'm not concerned about the pain and grief and disappointment you feel.
Yeah.
All I need you to acknowledge is that I'm disappointed and you need to change.
Sure.
Because if you don't, things are going to get ugly, And so it's not your concerns are at the bottom of the pile here.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about intention, it's not about whether it was negative or not. It was about what other outcome could there have been. What were you wanting? You're wanting a change in conduct, a change in behavior. And it's a form of control.
Yeah.
Because if you're getting people to change the way they think, change the way they talk, change the way they dress, change the way they dance, behave, which friends they hang out with, who they have lunch with, how often they talk to their mother, all of these things are all intended to manipulate,
Sure.
to control, to isolate, and to make sure that the primary giver of the message is the one who's being coercive.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I was thinking of, I'm just going back to my sort of working days, and in sort of marketing, they used to talk about push and pull, right? And I wonder whether this aspect is about control or the loss of control. So one's a push and one's a pull. And so are men not being able to be the man they want to be, or whatever, in today's society, as women have more influence or whatever through social change. So I just wonder, I tend to think it's all about control, but then again, the other part drags me back a bit.
Bit of historically, right? Like it's a changing society where, things are different, where it's not just guys who will come home to dinner, clean house, things like that. That was long ago, I assume, or hopefully longer ago. Is that what you're trying to say, Warren? Where
I think so.
Things are changing a bit more.
Yeah.
Where's the line, or what's the difference now?
Well, I think you're making reference to the gender norms in our society. You talk about the cultural change and the societal change, but I think what you're inferring is the cultural normativity that used to be, right? Where women were the nurturing housewife and cook and doing all the domestic chores, and men were the breadwinner and the protector and so on. And of course, that's changed quite a lot. And what we now start seeing is that in our attempt to create a more equal society, it is entirely possible that some men, will feel emasculated in that process because they no longer can practice this masculine hegemony, this feeling of superiority, and this historical, birthright to be the king of his castle. And I think you're right, Warren. For some men, it is they do experience a sense of loss, and it is precisely that sense of loss of authority, control, power that may very well result in the use of violence to assert control, power, dominance. And this happens for the simple reason that our identity as men are linked by ourselves to this notion of legitimacy of power and control. So I have a legitimate right to be in control, to be powerful, and to not be spoken to badly by my wife or my partner, to not, and what I say goes. So that's my entitlement. It's my male privilege. And if anyone threatens that privilege, then of course that can be a bit unsettling. And one way to respond to that is, of course, is through coercion initially, and then later with violence.
Right.
That I guess that brings us to our next area of topic. It's forms and patterns of abuse. So we'd just like to talk to you, Dr. Navin.
No need for name calling.
Yes. What are the different types of abuse we can find in a relationship? Like we've touched on coercive control. What are the other types? We've touched on a bit of physical. What more should people look out for?
Well, I think the physical violence, of course, is something that gets a lot of media attention when it is known. But I'll also say that a lot of the violence is hidden, because this violence occurs in the privacy of people's bedrooms, in the privacy of their bathrooms. It happens at 2 a.m. When services are not all fully available, and so on, and when help is far away. So even though we think that physical violence will be very overt, it's actually not. A lot of the violence occurs covertly within the privacy of the home. And of course, when there is public displays of that violence, that indicates an escalation of violence, and it's in fact a serious sign of escalated danger, right? Because if the person is not afraid for the neighbors to know what he's like, and not afraid for the police to show up, then of course that's a bit brazen, isn't it? And that implies a sense of lethality. We link that with very lethal outcomes in many cases. But we also know that that sometimes other forms of violence coexist with the physical violence, and sometimes they exist without the physical violence, and such like is psychological abuse, where there's these mind games, and the person starts to question whether they're going insane, because their sense of reality is constantly shifted by the person that's inflicting the abuse. And that's through gaslighting, it's through shifting blame. So, for example, if I beat my wife, I might say, well, it's you pushed me. You shouldn't have. I told you to stop, and you wouldn't stop. Why did you nag? I told you not to have your friends over. If you just listened to me, none of this would have happened. And so the messaging there is that, it's my fault. I'm responsible for my own violence. And this is the sad reality about abuse and violence in the home, is that women get to actually believe that they are responsible for their own violence. And this is the tragedy of it. It's one of the reasons they stay for so long, because they believe that they are complicit and that they need to do the changing for the violence to stop. And of course, it takes a long time for that belief to be eroded to the point that they get help or leave the abusive relationship. And oftentimes it's too late. So criticism and humiliation, put-downs, is very commonly seen. And of course, this happens privately. The food's too salty, why can't you take care of the children better? Look at you, you're a mess. Why didn't you get another job? Constantly belittling the other person. You won't amount to much. Everything you have, I've given you. Just constant put-downs. And when you hear that once or twice, it might not affect you. But when you're hearing the same messaging day on day, week on week, month on month, year on year for many years, it becomes an entrenched belief. It's a tape recorder that doesn't stop playing. Even when the person stops saying it, the tape recorder continues. And so the memory of it is very, very unsettling. And it instills a belief system that I'm responsible for my own mess. And then when my neighbors and my friends say to me, well, you made your bed, now lie in it, then of course it reinforces this belief that it is my fault indeed. But but silent treatment is just as punishing as vocal outrage. And then, of course, we know that men who use this form of abuse don't want competition, so they don't want an alternate view.
Yeah.
So one way to control the narrative is to prevent access to resources, prevent access to other forms of advice. So controlling how often she sees her mother, controlling how often she visits her friends, controlling when her sisters come over. In fact, there'll be deliberate attempts to rubbish those relationships so that she's not welcome in those homes.
Yeah.
To the point that she's completely isolated, has no recourse, has no access to support, can't phone anyone at 2 a.m, can't ask for help, can't borrow money to leave. And so this isolation serves a very, very strategic purpose. And the purpose is alienate, isolate, humiliate, to the point that they become completely under the control of the person issuing.
So it's a definite strategy.
So what is sad is that most the pattern that we see is playbook. It's so common. Of course, men that use these practices would think that they invented it, but it's not. It's a very, very common way of controlling people with whom you want to control.
Right. Okay.
So whether they, and of course the strategy, they don't necessarily have a blueprint at the start of it. It unfolds as you go. So there's name calling, and that doesn't work, and there's a push and a shove, and then there's alienating you from your friends and family, and that doesn't work. You're still a very naughty spouse. You're not listening. You don't do things the way I want you to do it. It might get physical. And if that doesn't work, well, we'll just escalate the frequency of the abuse, of the physical. And if that doesn't work, we'll just increase the intensity of it. And this is where we see the lethality increasing as well. And so this is this often results in a femicide. Last year.
Just for those who are listening, what is a femicide? And also for me,
sure.
Because
So we talk about homicide, and homicide is a killing of another. But when we talk about a femicide, this is how common it is that it's been given its own nomenclature.
Wow.
A femicide is the intentional killing of a woman.
Right.
And last year in Australia, we had out of 100 female murders, 80% of them were at the hands of a current or former partner.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a shocking statistic.
Absolutely.
And of course, in other parts of the world where violence is more endemic, we see much higher rates. In South Africa, for example, the rates of murder were 1 woman every 8 hours.
Wow.
And 10 years earlier, in 1999, it was 1 woman every 6 hours. So the rate of homicide is just unacceptable. Of course, 1 death is 1 death too many, but that this happens so frequently is unacceptable. And of course, we only know this because of the murder investigations and the criminal investigations that we see on the TV. But if we, in South Africa and in other places, they are able to count the bodies in the morgue and see if they know who the perpetrator was. And of course, that's then called a case of femicide. So femicide is a global phenomenon. It's not just an Australian thing, but it is what it calls for is for us to be more attuned to high-risk cases and cases where there's high risk of lethality. And those cases I'll quickly share would be where there's presence of a weapon, where there's the use of alcohol and drugs, where there's escalated and increasing intensity of the violence, where we see protracted violence, where the person's isolated and has no access to help and resources and no way to escape. And of course, the presence of pregnancy can escalate the threat. So does unemployment and economic strife in the family. And of course, if there's any marital discord around any other issue, the threat is high. And of course, linked to femicide is also the idea of involvement of children, and we often see family murders where there may be the spouse, but also children involved. And so it's really important then for the protection of children, for the protection of women, and for the prevention of femicide that we absolutely work very hard at understanding the problem and working and of course trying to get involved early in the intervention so that we don't have to deal with the femicide consequences, that we can empower people to make decisions about whether they stay or leave in that relationship, whether they get help or not. And of course, what we start to see is that the real focus now is about, of course, providing care and support to women who live with abuse, but it's also about providing, as you do, care and support and guidance and information to men who might use violence as a way of resolving conflict. Men who use violence as a means to assert power and control. Men who feel emasculated and need to use violence to assert control. And of course, men are violent against men. I mean, go to any pub and, the war stories there are quite evident. Men hurt more men than they do women, absolutely. But men also hurt women. And this is something we need to own up to and take a complete responsibility for it. That's not to say that women don't hurt women or that people who don't subscribe to a binary identity also not abuse. But what we start to see is that the frequency and extent of violence, of men's violence against women, is far more serious than that of women's violence against women. And of course, the lethality associated with it is far more commonplace when men abuse women. So it's disproportionate force.
And that's why we're focusing on men as the main perpetrators in the hills area. That's where our focus is. But it's not just the hills, it's everywhere. We might sort of move on because I'm conscious that we've got a lot more questions. Sure. So I just want to just move to the next one, if that's all right.
Yeah. Let's move to the next.
So this is about, I guess it's a little bit what you were just talking about, Navin. I'm interested in what are the drivers, because my interest is how do we stop this from happening? Is there a way? And to me, you've got to go, for my way of thinking, you've got to go back to what's driving all this. So do you have a perspective about that?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that it's a complex problem. In actual fact, it's a wicked problem. It goes beyond the complexities is so high that it's wicked. It's wicked because there's so many intersecting parts of this, and the moment you're trying to fix one aspect, something else is deficient. And so you need a whole of society kind of approach to it. Piecemeal doesn't fix the problem. These band-aid solutions don't work. And so the societal factors is largely about gender inequality. And worldwide, we find that wherever there's high societal inequality, there's an increased risk of violence, especially gender-based violence or violence against women and children. And this is about discriminatory attitudes and systemic imbalances of power within societies. And that's why it's so important for us to work hard towards gender equality in homes, in the workplace, in schools, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, I recall, if after dinner, if little Mary has got to go wash the dishes while little Tommy goes and plays with his cars or guns, God forbid. And so this is historically how we've grown up our children. We've entrenched a level of gender inequality in their minds, so that little Tommy grows up thinking that domestic chores is a woman's job, and that men have privileges that women don't because they're better. And so the inequality serves two purposes. One, it reinforces the idea that, and it legitimizes the idea that men have a right to disproportionate power.
Right.
That's what it does. The second thing the inequality does is it subjugates women to the second-class status in the society and reduces their access to equal resources to be equal. So it's a kind of self-perpetuating cycle where people that have less power in that society will stay in that subjugation, and then men or others, elites, wherever they are, that have power in the society will retain that power and legitimize it. And the moment there's threats to it, we can use force. And this plays out in the world today. In other ways, we see governments using force in this way, disproportionate force, bullying. And again, what does this do? This is the danger of our current time. What we're seeing is a global legitimization of masculine hegemony, of men's force against others. It's on display for all to see.
Yeah.
And this is incredibly dangerous, because what do we tell young children growing up in this environment today that are witnessing the inequality and the oppression that's happening at country level, at community level,
Yep.
at school level,
Yep.
bullying in the school,
Yep.
for example.
And I think that for me, you see that in terms of what I call the rise of violence in society.
Yeah.
To me, there is a general increase of violence across the board, and it almost seems acceptable, and it's becoming more acceptable.
So absolutely. So this is a real concern. Is this notion is that man's identity is linked to a greater power and a right to power and control, and of course the attitudes that condone that support that is a problem. So anything that produces this male privilege can reinforce the idea that it's okay for men to be bullies, for men to be even with their own children, So simple things, men use, and women I suppose too, but men especially would use this male privilege in the household to tell little Tommy, go get my shoes,
Yep.
go get my broom, go get my car keys, go get daddy's cigarettes. Why does a child have to do those things for you? That's masculine privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, so that's unhealthy. But there's also attitudes that promote this inferiority of women in the society, and that's the sexist jokes
Yep.
that people condone. Donald Trump talked about it was was it change room talk.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how we legitimize bad language and bad because it's a locker room conversation, man.
Yeah.
That's
Brush
what
it
we
off
do.
as if it's nothing.
Yeah,
but
we minimize it. We minimize it,
in reality,
and
it's
we
a very big
legitimize
deal.
it.
Yeah.
But
Can't-
actually,
can't
it's
be
a
saying
gross
so.
violation of rights of women. And so these attitudes are things we need to address. But there are also community factors. And what we see is in communities where there's low social capital, where people care less about their neighbors, we find that there's a high risk of both poverty, but also of crime and a lack of support for each other. So social capital is this idea about creating networks in our community, about supporting each other and preventing harm or minimizing harm to the other. I recall in South Africa, in a particular township where we worked with women and men in the township to prevent violence, which was quite endemic there. Whenever there was violence in a home, the community would take their metal cups and go to that shack and make a noise, knock on it, just to let the man inside know that there's people outside in the community who will not tolerate your violence in the privacy of your home. So you stop.
Yeah.
And that was far more effective than having the police arrive hours later when the abuse has already happened.
Yeah.
So community, I mean, that's an exercise of social cap. And I'm not saying that we must, because that can be dangerous in these days where people are armed and so on. Of course, call the police. But the idea is that communities need to also take care of each other and engage in activities that make people feel included, men and women, and of course to build resources for men to not be emasculated, to feel like they are in control without having the need to beat women. And then, of course, there's relationship factors as well. So, for example, if there's a past exposure to violence, so if I grew up with violence in my home as a child, that's called an adverse childhood event. And for me, if growing up with violence from abusive parents might have normalized violence for me, then that's the only way I know how to resolve conflict. So in school, I will be a bully. I will beat up other kids. In the workplace, I will be rude to colleagues and co-workers. And in my home, I'll beat up my wife. And sometimes we don't see that happening across the board, though. Sometimes the violence is exclusive to the home. It doesn't happen in the workplace, doesn't happen in the school. but it happens in the privacy of your home for the simple belief that, well, she's my property and I can do with her whatever I want.
Is it just about anger?
Warren, that's often what we call plausible deniability.
Yep.
Oh, he was just angry, Warren. He was just angry. Give him a break. Everyone's entitled to be angry. He's had a rough day at work. He's got a lot going on at the moment, you know? And so it kind of almost intends to excuse the behavior.
Yep.
And what it is, in actual fact, is a denial of responsibility. Because if someone is truly angry about something that happened at work, why didn't they beat up their supervisor? On the way home, why didn't they beat up the policeman that stopped them?
Because actions have consequences there.
Exactly.
But they don't think that way in a relationship.
No, because in a relationship, we have impunity, you see?
Yeah.
If I beat up someone in the privacy of my home, nobody knows. There's a secret. And she won't tell anyone because she knows what will happen to her if she does.
Yeah.
And so I have impunity. And so that's the other reason that it stays secret and prolonged for so long.
Right.
So, so normalizing violence as a mechanism to deal with conflict or lack of control is in fact a big part of the problem. So all of these things, economic stress, anger, alcohol, I just had too many VBs, you know, it's their fault, it's not my fault, it's the beer's fault. Those are all denial of responsibility.
Okay.
And so what we say is that men need to take responsibility for their own violence by not blaming the anger, the beer, the stress at work, the financial stress, etc. Take ownership. The only person that...
Everyone's going through something.
Yeah,
Everyone's
exactly.
got their own
Absolutely.
issues in their life. Maybe the other person's had some beer, but that doesn't mean they went up and like punched you or like tried to control you or abused you. They you know, are an adult. They need to take control.
Well, this is why we say alcohol doesn't cause the violence. It's a strong risk factor, certainly. It's present in many cases of violence, but there are sober men who beat their wives, and there are drunk men who are absolute darlings when they're drunk. So it's not to say that alcohol is a cause, because if you say that something's a cause, it must mean that if A caused B, A must be present in every case of B. And that's not the case here. We don't see alcohol present in every case of violence, and we don't see sobriety present in every case of violence either. We don't say that being sober caused the violence.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sorry, Levi. We had a guest on very early, and we were talking about drivers, and he actually talked about some things like alcohol as a trigger, and the sort of words he was using. Because some people, as you know, as you just mentioned, they'll say, you know, they'll blame the alcohol, they'll blame the drugs or whatever, but they won't take the responsibility.
So this is also why it's a wicked problem, is that it causes much confusion, because to the woman who's being abused, it's believable. Yeah, he said he's sorry, he said he had too much to drink, and you know, I believe him, because when he's sober, he's a darling of a man.
Right.
He's a beautiful father. He's a loving husband. It's just when he has one too many with his mates, that's when things go south, you know. And so when he says it wasn't him, it was the alcohol, it's absolutely believable. It's plausible deniability and believed by the victim themselves. And the danger with this, of course, as I said, is that it denies responsibility for the offense. And the only way, and the denial is often on both sides, the victim and a victim survivor and the perpetrator. And so what we want, a big part of the healing and the way to stop the violence is to begin to acknowledge that this is my violence. I did this to her. I did this. Whether I was drunk, stressed, unemployed, poor, whatever the case is, I did that. And so when we take ownership of it, it breaks the deniability, and it provides room then for us to say, can you envisage a time or a space without the violence? Can you imagine getting respect without forcing it? Can we reframe what we mean by respect for being a man? And so those are the difficult conversations that need to be had. Sadly, it's very hard undoing a lifetime of use of violence. And so somebody who's lived their whole life legitimizing violence as a form of normal conduct, it becomes very, very hard. And so there's a need for professional help in that regard.
It's interesting. I've I've heard it described as the devil made me do it.
Oh,
You know, that was this person's excuse.
yeah.
He wasn't prepared to take responsibility in any way. It was always someone else forced him to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We might go on and talk maybe about the control.
Yeah. So I guess we've talked a lot about control as a core issue. Can you explain how control lies at the heart of domestic violence? Why is it such a big thing in domestic violence?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, I think the control in itself, as Warren mentioned, is an all part of a society. If you're the CEO of a company, you have to control. If you're the head of HR, you have to have control.
Yeah.
If you're driving a heavy-duty vehicle, you have to control the vehicle. So
Yeah.
there's if you're the owner of your own ABN, you control its operation. So control in itself is not a problem. You need to. I mean, the elements of leadership is what. Management is plan, organize, lead, and control. So in a business context, that's what we do regularly. So control in itself is not bad. It becomes harmful when the intention behind the control is intending to undermine autonomy of others, and when that loss of autonomy causes significant serious harm to the other person, psychological or emotional or physical. And of course, sometimes we will see where there's no physical abuse, just having constant psychological harm may result in physical symptoms. So persons become sick, irritable bowel syndrome, gastritis, headaches, migraines, sexual dysfunction, maladaptive coping, alcohol, drugs, smoking, binge eating, bulimia. All of these things can be linked with poor self-concept.
Yeah.
Right.
And so psychological, there's a fine line between psychological harms and physical harms. Of course, the physical harms are more acute, but the psychological harms can often result in a very protracted way, in an insidious way, over time in physical outcomes. So the danger is when we associate the right to control as linked to my identity as a man. So my masculinity is defined by my ability to control. If I lose control, then I'm less of a man.
Right.
And this is the cause of how many bar fights, right?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Levi, you're drinking like a girl.
Yeah.
So what have I just done there? I've insulted your masculinity.
How dare you?
And you'll beat me up for it.
Yep.
Because
I don't know if I could, but yeah.
I'm sure you could. You'll have to catch me first.
Yeah.
But I think that's the danger, is that we insult each other's masculinity. And so oftentimes the way men would experience the offense to themselves, because they're victims, right, in their own perpetration of violence, is that I've just been indignified. I suffer an indignity as a man.
Yeah.
You've insulted my masculinity, and for that there's a price to pay.
Yeah.
And that price might be in the form of coercion, physical, psychological harms, emotional harms, etc., etc. So that's how it plays out. It's control in itself is not the problem. It's the association of control with masculine identity and masculine hegemony, the idea that being a man is superior and better than being feminine. And therein lies the danger. And what is hard to change about it is that our societal norms reinforce this idea that men of masculinity being better, stronger. There are cultures that value boy children more than they value girl children, right?
Yeah.
In companies, men may be valued better. We've just done a systematic review in high-income countries to see how the disproportionality in pay of women who have obesity than men who have obesity. And even there, women who have obesity are prejudiced
Really?
by having a wage penalty. So there's multiple forms of oppression that women experience in the society that keeps their status as less than. And we call it intersectionality. There's multiple forms of oppression that brings to bear upon them. And of course, in so doing, legitimizes male's power in the society. So when you say to men, be equal in your home, it's very contradictory, but hang on, I'm not equal in my society. In my society, I'm the king. I have a lot more power, a lot more privilege.
Why would I want to be
why-
equal at home
exactly.
when I'm elsewhere a king?
Sure.
Yeah. That is, I definitely see where you're coming from there. I guess in terms of the victim, let's say we've got viewers out there who have might be thinking, oh, I've got these tendencies. What are some things that they could look at when talking to their partner? How would their partner be feeling as the coercive control, as the abuse is progressing? Because I'm sure there will be some tell signs where partners are not feeling so great, and they might be more reserved, or won't be giving their point of views maybe. Like, are there tell signs for the victim? On the victim's behalf, where the male can now understand, okay, wait, things are changing. I am now in control. This is, I've taken it one step too far, where they're just doing everything I say now. Does that make sense?
Well, I think we've been talking a lot about males and females, and I think the caveat we should be offering our listeners is that we these words can often be very impactful and seen as violence to people who don't identify with these binary terms, right? Yeah. But for the purpose of what we're doing in terms of identifying men as mainly perpetrators of violence against women, and women who are as mainly victims, that would be the caveat, is that we don't mean to exclude people who don't identify with those binary terms. And, but I think you're right, is that there are some patterns that emerge, and what we see is that the pattern is often one of tension building initially. And that tension building might be protracted name-calling, protracted coercion, little pushes, shoves, belittling, eventually isolation, and then, of course, physical violence as it escalates. And that really causes people to walk on eggshells, because there's so much tension. I just don't know when it's going to snap. I just don't know when the next punch is going to come. I just don't know. I know it's coming soon, but so we try and do things to please. And this is what's very confusing, is because in the mind of the person who's being controlling, this is working. Yeah. She's changed. She's a much better wife now. Yep. The food's great. The kids, look how well they're dressed. The sex is even better. So you know what? Because she's trying harder. Sure. And so that reinforces the idea that, I'm being rewarded for my controlling behavior. Yeah. And so it's very confusing for men as well to undo the behavior, because it's working. Why would I undo it? Right. And so that walking on eggshells and very tense period, and there's no time limit to it. It could take weeks, days, months, years for that period to last. And eventually it progresses, when the messaging is no longer being heard, into an explosion of forms of physical violence, where there's a beating oftentimes. Or escalated aggression, and after that comes this phase of remorse, right? And followed by the honeymoon. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to do that. It was you should have just listened to me. I didn't mean to push you. I fell. I used to. I'm sorry. It was. I did it, but it wasn't me. It was. That's not. Yeah. So deniability the whole time. So. And we'll shower her with gifts and shower her with presents and sweet nothings, and it's a honeymoon phase again. It's a pursuit. The love bombing. It's a remorse and pursuit. And of course, I've worked in the shelter movement, and we used to do 24-hour hotline counselling and so on. And some women would say to me that they actually look forward to the beating, because they knew that after that came the honeymoon. And that's the only time they got love and affection, peace and joy in their relationship. And that's, of course, very sad, because she's come to normalize the presence of violence in her life as acceptable. And so that pattern of is very explicit. It can be seen. There's some variations to it. There's no extent telling how long each phase takes, but it's present. And then, of course, so being aware of where you are in the relationship. Are you in the tension building? Are you close to an explosion of violence? Is he pursuing you again? Is he being remorseful because he knows he hurt you and he doesn't want you to tell the police or the family? Is he showing shame and embarrassment? Let's give him another chance. And then the tension building starts again. So that pattern is there. But I think early on in relationships, what men and women can look for as telltale signs would be, of course, gaslighting, blowing things out of proportion, making her doubt, no, that's not what you said. This is what you said. You said this here last week. So just changing the tune.
Sure.
Constant criticism or belittling. You always do this. You don't listen to you. Why don't you wear your hair the way I want it? I don't like this color of dress. Why do you insist on wearing it? You just want to offend me, don't you? So this constant challenging of self-worth, self-decision, self-respect really undermines the confidence in the person, and it affects self-concept. Eventually, what we start to see is people become silent, withdrawn. Emotionally, but also physically, because I'm a mess. Look at me. I can't go visit my mum. I can't go visit myself. I don't want to have dinner with my friends because it'll make him upset.
Sure.
And so that kind of isolation is a problem. Financial control is a big thing. We hear of loving husbands who give their wives an allowance.
Yeah.
And how nice is that, isn't it? Yeah.
Gosh.
The danger with it, Warren, is that if I give you an allowance, if you misbehave, I can take it away.
Right.
So the giving of allowance is counterbalanced by the removal of the allowance, which is the act of control.
Yeah.
And of course, I make you dependent on that allowance because you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to have your own bank card. And so I control your access to resources and money. And financial control is a big thing. We see that also with elder abuse, where children of elderly people or caregivers would exploit someone's finances.
Right.
And it's, again, within a domestic context. When you talk about domestic violence, it's not just about intimate partners. It could very well be between elders and their children or caregivers or extended family members as well. And I guess where people see rules and regulations, they have strict rules about what they can do and can't do in the relationship, means that their autonomy is undermined. Threats of intimidation, they know that if they breach those rules, they'll be held to pay, means that they are under control. And of course, manipulating the reality. He didn't do that. He didn't mean that. It was an accident. We don't recall the horror of what happened the other night because the reality is reframed along the way.
I think we're almost out of time.
Yep.
Levi, do you have maybe one last question you'd like to ask tonight?
Thanks, Warren. I do have one last question for Navin. So just a question. How does domestic violence affect not just the victim, but also the children and other family members, would you say?
Thanks for that, Levi. I think you're right in acknowledging that the problem, because it's wicked and complex, doesn't just involve the simple pairing of someone who uses violence and somebody who experiences the violence, but that other people related to them, because we live in an ecosystem, are affected as well. Children, of course, primary concerns, because if they witness violence, that constitutes an adverse childhood event, and such children can grow up to believe that violence is a legitimate and normal way of resolving conflict or of disciplining your women. And so, and children who experience the violence themselves directly can grow up to thinking that, violence and love does coexist, because dad says he loves me, but when I'm naughty, he gives me pow on my buttocks. And so that tells me that a person can tell you they love you and can beat you the next day. So violence and love does coexist. And the danger with a girl child experiencing such violence is similar, is that they grow up believing that it's violence and love does coexist, because my boyfriend can tell me he loves me and the next day can beat me, because it's does coexist. It's okay, it's normal. And so this framing or normalizing violence in relationships happens really, really young. But further to your question about the ripple effect, Children, of course, can have their schooling affected. There can be developmental challenges because they're living in fear, the threat of fear, threat of violence, and so the developmental progress can be altered. Of course, schooling, the attendance at school can be a problem if they're changing homes and changing environments, changing schools can be very disruptive. The same with the victims of abuse when they have to go to work and be productive under the state of fear. They have to be a good worker at work and then go home to suffer abuse at night. And so it's hard for them to be productive in that space. And of course, that's why it's a problem for business. It's a problem for business owners. It's a problem for schools. There's, of course, the ripple effect extends to the extended family. So parents, siblings, people connected to the couple, of course, are affected because they can see what's going on or they have a hint of what's going on, but don't quite know how to get involved. Is this a private affair? And so they're really conflicted as to not knowing when to intervene or when to make it their problem or when to offer support and what kind of support to offer. So we lack capacity. So the ripple effect can be tremendous. It's very disempowering for everybody involved to witness a loved one suffer prolonged and protracted and escalating abuse. And of course, this is why it's important for us to talk about it to our young children and to make sure that people that when they get into relationships understand that jealousy is not a measure of love. That treating you as a property, as an item, as a commodity is not a representation of love. We need to reframe what love is and what affection is and what is acceptable and at what point do we call violence violence. It's the other point perhaps worth mentioning is that people who suffer abuse, of course, victimized by that abuse, but they're experts on their own victimology. So we never presume to know how people experience their own violence and when they should leave or when they should get help. That's the whole nature of the abuse is disempowerment. So the nature of the help has got to be empowerment. And valuing self and valuing autonomy, not the opposite. And of course, a big part of that is valuing confidentiality. If you breach confidentiality, of course, the ripple effect of that is that you escalate the harm. There'll be reprisals for it. So we do need to respect confidentiality and of course, act in relation to what the person's needs are. We call them survivors rather than victims because there's a lot of respect that needs to be given to people who live with violence for having tolerated it for so long, for having lived with it for so long, for having survived it for so long. So it's important to recognize that they're not just victims. It is possible for them to transcend their own victimology and to become survivors in their own right, as many, many women have. Sadly, there are some women who don't survive it. And recognizing that survivorship is also plays emphasis on the fact that women do succumb in these relationships. So hence the need for us to do more and play our part.
Great. Wow, Warren, did you know that? I guess wording is quite important when we are talking about domestic and family violence, as opposed to saying victim. Saying survivors is it plays a role in a progressive society. Is that something you had known?
In fact, I only became aware of it just last week when I was talking to
Deb.
someone who had been a victim. And she said to me, I'm no longer a victim, I'm a survivor.
Yeah.
And that was just for me, that just said to me her self-esteem had risen so much.
Absolutely.
Just in that one word.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Gosh, it is something to look out for and understand.
I think for me, it's really important for listeners to be aware that domestic violence, when it occurs, can last for a long time, and the trappings of it can seem inescapable. But it is entirely possible to survive a domestic violence relationship, and of course to transcend it and to free oneself from experiences of violence. And then, of course, if you're perpetrating violence, it's also entirely possible to stop that. That's a learned behavior. and we can unlearn it. But there has got to be a breaking of the denial, and there's got to be a deliberate attempt to want to be a different person and to not use violence as a legitimate way. It's an illegitimate way.
That though, for me, I didn't grow up like in a terrible household or anything. However, there were some arguments and stuff, and it was quite difficult at home at a young age. And in primary school, actually, I was a very, very angry kid. And I like to blame other people. This was from like kinder to year 3, so very early on. But I was just so angry at home for, the arguments that might have happened. I took it out on, my friends, the people around me. And then I changed school and I realized like, wow, I really don't like who I was. I didn't like that I was causing harm. And I think I realized it's just not nice. Like you said, it's a ripple effect. It doesn't just affect the person you're, I guess, like making fun of. In the case, I don't know what a year 3 does nowadays, how I would have bullied. But I think it is like you do see stuff earlier on, whether it be family, through your family or, around you. It could be like your uncles, it could be like friends of friends, things like that. So you do see these things and you learn it. And that's, I think, what happened to me. And then I had to learn that it wasn't okay and we shouldn't be doing this. And I had to educate myself as to why and what I was doing and how it was harming other people. So...
But you only reached that conclusion because you were able to, as you grew, to reflect on what it was doing to you. And so the power of self-reflection is really important here. Is to stop the bus and say, what am I doing to myself? What am I doing to others? What kind of person do I want to be in the future? What's my future self look like? And how can I envisage a time in my life when I don't have to resort to violence? So that reflection was critical, and there is obviously kudos to you for doing that. But what you're reflecting on there is about either acting out or acting in. So, and children will do that. They would act out on others, or they would act in and harm themselves, self-harm. And we see that increasingly as well. But the ripple effect extends not only to the children, extends to the broader society, where the education system has got to deal with children now who are absent from school. With not just children, teachers themselves are victims of abuse. And the teachers not showing up to school, and who's teaching our kids, right? The same with the health system. All of these health consequences of gender violence. And of course, the health consequences of gender-based violence is greater than malaria, TB, and road accidents altogether. Right? So there's a disproportionate focus and resources spent on gender-based violence compared to other health conditions, because it's a worldwide problem. And I think the health system then has consequences. Of course, there's strain on resources. So too with social services and so on. The impact is felt throughout. If we're talking about impact on the workforce, women who are living with abuse have to go to work the next day. And how can they be productive when there's a threat of violence that they're living under? And the same with men that have to go to work and pretend that they didn't beat their wife last night. How do they work with all that shame and guilt that they live with? So it's not that all men abuse and are guiltless and shameless. There's a tremendous amount of guilt and shame that people feel. And it's a question of how can we provide support and resources for people to deal and use that guilt and shame to help the reflection and to create a change state in people's lives.
I think that would be a great spot for me to jump in, Navin. We've been talking a long while here, and it's a great conversation. But time is it's caught up with us, and we have many more questions. Maybe you'll come back and for a second episode. But look, I don't know about you, Levi, but I've learnt so much because, Navin, you've been able to put this into a context, an easy-to-understand context that resonates with me anyway, enables me to just understand more about the drivers and how our masculinity features so much in what happens in domestic violence and how it plays out. So thank you for the guidance. Thank you for the advice. Thank you for coming along today. And guys, we're going to be spending a bit more time shortly. I've just got to check on terms of what our next podcast is about. Yes, our next one is entitled "It Doesn't Happen in the Hills," and we're referring to domestic violence, aren't we? And we've got the mayor coming along, Navin. She's coming along to tell us what does happen, and I think there'll be no surprise given what you've been talking about today. So, guys, make sure you tune in for the next episode. It's glad you've been with us today. My name's Warren. Thank you for joining us. Let me just throw to Levi just to wrap up for today. Thanks, Levi.
Thank you. Thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate everyone tuning in. Thanks again, Navin, for your time. It was very educational, which I really appreciate, or we really appreciate, I should say. Hopefully it was educational for the viewers. For me personally, I think I learnt a lot more about coercive control, where we have talked about it a little bit, but today we've got a good understanding and an easily definable, I guess, definition of coercive control. I guess, one of the biggest things I learned today was that rippling effect of how it does affect those people around and how it can cause harm, not just in that, 1 or 2 day period. It can be for quite some time. It can really impact and shape someone both. I guess for you, Navin, it was quite positive, where you now do a lot of work in the community and are doing your own research, which is very inspiring and very great to hear. Hopefully, we can get a lot out of that. And I guess there aren't so great stories where it can cascade into a negative impact, which is quite upsetting. But it is important to note if you are having those tendencies, it can have a rippling effect. And I think that's what I'll walk away with, understanding if, there's something going on. It's not as simple as a you and me conversation. It's going to affect everyone. So thanks again, guys. If you want any further information, you can contact us on goodmenproject@hca.org.au. That's goodmenproject@hca.org.au. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for joining us. This podcast is for information and educational purposes. The views expressed by the host and their guests are their own views and do not constitute professional advice. Listeners should consult professionals for specific advice tailored to their needs. We make no representation or warranties concerning the accuracy, completeness, or applicability of the information in the podcast.